So, welcome to week 8 of Project Performance Management. And today we're going to talk about 3 major areas of project performance. And that's stakeholder engagement, project information distribution, and team performance. Project performance depends on how well stakeholders are engaged, information is shared, and how teams work together to deliver outcomes. So the goal today is to see these topics as connected parts of the project performance system rather than separate management tasks. Today's session connects stakeholder engagement, information distribution, and team performance as integrated drivers of project performance. So we're going to focus on these three areas, and they strongly influence project performance. And we'll begin with stakeholder engagement, where the focus is on understanding stakeholder needs, expectations, influence, and support during project execution. The key idea is that stakeholder engagement doesn't stop once planning ends. It continues throughout the project work and must be actively managed. And then next, we'll talk about information distribution. In here, we'll examine how project information supports performance when it reaches the right people in a form that they can use at the right time. And so we'll look at communication as an ongoing management activity that should be planned, managed, monitored, and adjusted. And then we'll talk about team performance. And here we'll focus on how trust, motivation, emotional intelligence, collaboration, and decision quality help shape and determine project outcomes. And we'll also talk about explore how team performance can be strengthened through awareness, reflection, and continuous improvement. And then we'll close by bringing everything together into an integrated perspective. And the main takeaway is that these 3 elements of stakeholder engagement, information flow, and team behavior should not be managed as isolated topics, but they work together as part of the overall project management system. Project performance improves when stakeholders stay engaged, information flows clearly, and teams work together effectively. A project can't perform well if stakeholders are disengaged, confused, or surprised. Stakeholders need timely information, opportunities to provide feedback, and confidence that the project team understands their expectations. However, at the same time, information distribution is not just sending messages or posting updates. It's part of the project's performance. The right information helps stakeholders make decisions, helps the team coordinate work, and helps the project manager identify problems early. And then finally, team performance is what turns plans, communications, and stakeholder expectations into actual progress. A capable team still needs motivation, trust, clear roles, healthy communication, and the ability to raise concerns before they become larger issues. And the main idea is that stakeholder engagement, information flow, and team performance work together again. So before we move directly into stakeholder engagement, we'll take a little look at today's topic and connect it to performance data and control concepts that we've already covered. The next slide shows how performance information not only matters when people use it to communicate, decide, and act. Project performance is shaped how well the project manager coordinates work, communicates information, and supports the people doing the work. And so far, much of the work we've done is focused on how project performance is planned, measured, and monitored. We've looked at uncertainty, procurement, cost, earned value, schedules, and other control performance-related topics. Those tools are important, but performance information doesn't improve a project by itself. A variance report, a risk register, a schedule update, a dashboard, they only matter if people understand the information and use it to make decisions. And so that's where we shift in week 8. We're moving from performance data to performance behavior. Stakeholders need to know what the information needs. Project teams need to know what actions are expected. Project managers need to communicate clearly, create alignment, support the people responsible for doing the work. And this gives us a good bridge into stakeholder engagement because stakeholders are often the people who interpret, approve, resist, support, or act on project information. And with that shift from performance data to behavior in mind, we can begin with stakeholder engagement and why stakeholder relationships must be actively managed during project work. Stakeholder engagement is an active execution responsibility. It's not a one-time planning activity. Stakeholder engagement doesn't stop once the stakeholders are identified or once an engagement plan is created. Those planning documents are important, but they're only the starting point. During project work, stakeholder needs and expectations can shift. A stakeholder who seemed supportive during planning may become concerned once implementation begins. A user group may realize that a deliverable affects their workflow more than expected. A sponsor may need clearer information before making a decision. These are normal execution realities. The project manager's role is to keep engagement active. That means listening, communicating, clarifying expectations, and making sure stakeholders understand what's happening and why it matters. This is also where stakeholder engagement connects directly to performance. If stakeholders are not engaged, the project team may miss early warning signs, overlook resistance, or misunderstand what success looks like. When engagement is managed well, stakeholders are more likely to provide useful feedback, support decisions, and stay aligned with project outcomes. To manage engagement effectively, the project manager first needs to understand who the stakeholders are and what they need and how their influences may affect the project. So project managers engage stakeholders more effectively when they understand needs, impact, and influence. So a little bit of a overlap with planning here, but before a project manager can engage stakeholders effectively, they need to understand the stakeholder environment. Stakeholders are not all the same. Some are highly involved in the work. Some are affected by the outcome, but may not be involved every day. And some have formal authority, while others have informal influence. A useful starting point is to ask each stakeholder what they need from or expect from the project. That includes stated requirements, but it also includes their concerns, assumptions, fears, priority, and success criteria. The next question is impact. How does this project affect the stakeholder? Will it change their workflow, require new behavior, consume resources, create risk, or produce benefits? Then we look at influence. Some stakeholders can approve funding, remove barriers, provide resources, or create resistance. Others may not have formal authority, but their acceptance can strongly affect whether the project is successful. The goal is not to treat every stakeholder the same way. The goal is to tailor engagement so the project manager provides the right information, involvement, and support to the right stakeholders at the right time. Once stakeholder needs, impact, and influence are understood, the next step is managing and monitoring engagement as project conditions change. Stakeholder engagement must be adjusted as project conditions and stakeholder responses change. Once stakeholders are understood, the next step is to actively manage and monitor engagement. This is where stakeholder engagement becomes part of the project execution. Managing engagement includes the day-to-day work of communicating with stakeholders, addressing concerns, clarifying expectations, encouraging participation, and helping stakeholders understand how the project affects them. It's not just about keeping people informed. It's about maintaining working relationships that support project success. Monitoring engagement means paying attention to stakeholders and how they're responding. Are they participating? Are they asking useful questions? Are they resisting the project and its outcomes? Are they surprised by information they should already know? Are they still aligned with the project direction? When engagement's not working, the project manager may need to adjust the approach. That might mean changing the frequency of communication, involving a stakeholder earlier, escalating an unresolved issue, or providing more support to a group affected by the project. The performance connection here is important. Poor stakeholder engagement can lead to missed expectations, late decisions, resistance, rework, and loss of support. Strong engagement helps the project manager identify concerns earlier and maintain alignment as the project moves forward. Stakeholder engagement depends heavily on information. Next, we'll shift from stakeholder relationships to the way that project information is distributed, understood, and used. Project information supports performance when it reaches the right people in a form they can use. Now we're shifting from stakeholder engagement to project information distribution. These two topics are closely connected because engagement depends on information. Stakeholders can't support the project, provide useful feedback, or make good decisions if they don't have the information they need. Information distribution is more than sending updates. It's about making sure the right people receive the right information in a way they can understand and use. A sponsor may need a concise decision brief. A project team member may need task-related level detail. A stakeholder group affected by implementation may need timing, impact, and support information. A vendor may need technical specifications or delivery expectations. The timing also matters. Information that arrives too late may not help anyone make a decision or prevent a problem, but information that's too frequent or too detailed may create overload and cause people to miss what matters most. Effective information distribution supports performance by helping people coordinate work, understand project conditions, and respond to issues and make informed decisions. And project information, this determining what's needed and the timing should all be part of what you've integrated into your communications plan in planning. And what we're doing in execution is we're continuing to extend that planning concept into our execution because the stakeholder information needs change throughout the project in the same way that the stakeholders themselves and their influence and impact will evolve or change throughout the project. So it's important that information distribution be intentional. And so when it's intentional, we need to distinguish between planning communications and managing the flow of communications and monitoring whether communication is working. So effective communication requires the planning approach, managing the flow, and monitoring whether it works. Communications management is not just one activity. It includes planning how communications should happen, managing the actual flow of information, and monitoring whether communication is working. Planning communication is where the project manager thinks through stakeholder information needs. Who needs updates? What decisions need to be supported? What level of detail is appropriate? Which communications methods make sense for each audience? Managing communication is the execution side of stakeholder communications. This is where reports, meetings, dashboards, emails, updates, records, and conversations actually happen. The goal is to make sure project information is available, understandable, and useful. Monitoring communication asks a different question. Is the communication approach working? Are stakeholders informed? Are team members aligned? Are decisions delayed because information is missing? Are people overloaded with too much information or confused by inconsistent messages? When communication is not working, the project manager needs to adjust the approach. That might mean simplifying a report, changing meeting cadence, adding a dashboard, escalating issues sooner, or tailoring updates for different stakeholder groups. The main point is that communication supports performance only when it's planned, actively managed, and evaluated throughout the project. Going back to what I was saying, we take that plan and we evaluate it and let it evolve and continue to tailor it. It doesn't stop once the project management plan is approved. After looking at communication management cycle, we can focus on the communication process itself and what can interfere with shared understanding. Project communication succeeds when messages are clearly sent, correctly received, and confirmed through feedback. So we're going to shift here from communications management a little bit into the communications process itself. Even when communication is planned well, messages can still fail. A project manager may send an update, but that doesn't guarantee it was understood in the way that it was intended. Communication is only effective when the message is clearly transmitted, correctly interpreted, and supported by feedback. The basic communication process includes a sender, a message, a channel, and a receiver. But two other elements are especially important in project work, and that's feedback and noise. Feedback is important because communication should not be treated as one-way transmission. Project managers need to know whether the message was understood, whether clarification is needed, and whether the receiver knows what action to take. Noise is anything that interferes with understanding. It might include unclear wording, information overload, wrong timing, conflicting messages, technical jargon, assumptions, or other distractions. The main point is that communication is not successful just because the message was sent. It's successful when shared understanding is achieved. And it's considered to be the responsibility of the sender to make sure that this takes place, which means that as the sender, we need to validate that the message was received, and then we want this feedback that it was understood correctly and interpreted correctly. So that completes the communication process. Sometimes we do this when we ask for replies and emails, and we ask for feedback and to make sure we have shared understanding. So that's how the communication process works. Now we can examine how communication needs differ against the different project environments, the different project hybrid, predictive, or adaptive environments. Predictive, adaptive, and hybrid projects all need clear communication, but the cadence, formality, and feedback loops differ. Here, this slide connects the communication process to the way the project is delivered. Communication is important in every project, but it doesn't look exactly the same in every delivery approach. In predictive projects, communication is often more formal and planned. The project manager may rely on status reports, milestone reviews, meeting minutes, change logs, and governance updates to keep stakeholders informed. In an adaptive project, communication is usually more frequent and interactive. Teams may rely on daily conversations, reviews, demonstrations, backlog discussions, retrospectives, visible work boards, and the goal is not just to report progress, but to create rapid feedback so the team can adjust as the work evolves. Hybrid projects require both. They may need formal reporting for sponsors and governance groups, while also iterative feedback within the project team or the project focused portions of the work. The main point is that communication should be tailored. It's a communication method that works well for one project may be too slow, too informal, or too burdensome for another. The project manager's responsibility is to match the communication approach to the project's level of uncertainty, stakeholder expectations, and delivery rhythm. And what we're seeing in more modern applications of all of these models is a lot of this informal rapid feedback is starting to become more valuable, and it gets essentially collated into the more formal reports for the folks that need it. So it's kind of a continuum from the bottom. So we're even in predictive projects, we're seeing teams employ things like daily conversations or daily synchronization meetings or reviews. We're seeing more product demos and things like that without actually changing the delivery approach, but we're including those tools and techniques as part of our overall project communication process. Stakeholder engagement turns communication into alignment. Effective engagement uses communication and feedback to keep expectations, decisions, and project direction aligned. Stakeholder engagement is closely connected to communication, but it goes a step further. Communication is about sharing information clearly. Stakeholder engagement is about maintaining an active relationship with the people who influence or are affected by the project. During execution, stakeholders may react to progress, raise concerns, request changes, or clarify expectations. The project manager needs to listen carefully and respond in a way that keeps the project aligned. This matters because stakeholder expectations can change as the project becomes more visible. A stakeholder may not support the project during planning, but becomes concerned once trade-offs become clear. Another stakeholder may need more information than originally expected. Strong engagement helps the project manager identify those concerns early rather than waiting until they become resistance, conflict, or formal change request. And for this course, the key point is that stakeholder engagement is not a one-time planning task. It's an ongoing execution or project management responsibility. The project manager uses communication, feedback, issue tracking, and relationship management to help stakeholders understand where the project stands and how their concerns are being addressed. And I think I've mentioned this before, but I'll do it again. But as a young project manager in my early days, I was really focused on getting work done. And as long as we were meeting our marks, I didn't really feel a strong need to communicate out to stakeholders. And what that created is what I what it created for me was this concern that stakeholders had that they weren't getting any information, so they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what was expected. That created some questioning of our work. It created a lot of overhead that I could have avoided had I done a better job of keeping things visible. And that's the point. And we've got tools now that we can do. We can create dashboards now that we can put up on a screen, or we can put a dashboard online, and stakeholders, they can become more on demand, so they can get information as they need it, as long as you keep it visible so they can see it without actually having to interfere with the daily working of the project team. And so we've got a lot of new things that we can do where, kind of the old school way of doing things is having lots of formality and lots of pushing information out onto stakeholders. So nowadays we want to keep the stakeholders engaged to a point where they can go in and pull information out of the project communication system to get most of their questions answered. And then your job as the project manager is to facilitate that engagement and make sure that it's happening. So we've connected the stakeholder engagement to information distribution and project alignment. Project team performance drives project performance. So now we're moving into the rest of the presentation is going to be about the project team performance. This is probably, I'm going to say, my guess would be somewhere around 70% of a project manager's job, dealing with teams and managing the team. They're stakeholders as well, so it's all part of stakeholder. They're the sort of the really involved stakeholders, and so they have a whole different kind of engagement that we need to take care of as project managers. And so we'll start that here and we'll talk about that. Project performance depends on how well the team collaborates, adapts, solves problems, and sustains progress. Now we're shifting from stakeholder engagement and information distribution into team performance. This is an important connection. Other stakeholders may define expectations, and communication may help information move through the project. But the project team is the stakeholder group doing the work required to deliver outcomes. Team performance is not only about individual technical skill. A project can have talented people and still struggle if the team doesn't communicate well, coordinate work, resolve conflict, or adapt to changing conditions. This is why the human side of project performance is paramount, is important. Motivation, emotional intelligence, psychological safety, trust, and decision-making behavior all affect how well the team performs. These factors influence whether people speak up, share concerns, challenge assumptions, learn from mistakes, and stay committed when the project becomes difficult. And as we move into this part of the presentation, the main idea is that project performance is not produced by plans and metrics alone. It's also produced by people working together effectively under real project conditions. So we'll begin looking at motivation, because sustained project performance depends partly on whether the team members remain committed, engaged, and willing to contribute their best work. Project teams perform better when people understand the purpose, feel supported, and see that their work matters. Motivation is one of the human factors that shapes project performance. A project team may have the right plan, may have the right tools, the right technical skills, but performance can still decline if people feel disconnected, unsupported, or unrecognized. Motivation affects the level of energy, attention, persistence, and communication that team members bring to the work. One important part of motivation is purpose. People usually perform better when they understand why the work matters and how their contribution supports to the larger project outcome. Support is also important. Motivation can drop quickly when team members face unclear expectations, missing resources, conflicting priorities, or poor communication. The project manager helps sustain performance by removing barriers and making sure the team has what it needs to do the work. Recognition matters as well. That doesn't have to mean formal rewards. It can be as simple as acknowledging effort, progress, problem solving, or collaboration. Finally, motivation is connected to autonomy. When team members have appropriate ownership and are trusted to make decisions within their role, they're more likely to stay engaged and accountable. So, team performance, one of the things that I studied when I worked on my dissertation was I studied coordination in agile projects. And coordination has a lot to do with this motivation. And one of the things that we found is that a highly coordinated, effective team, they have this common mindset. In other words, they know their role in the bigger picture of what's going on. So they perform better when they understand what matters. They also understand better when they know what people are doing around them. So they understand what the expectations are and what others are doing. They also have the right communications, the right information, and the right tools and the right things at the right time for the right purpose in the right condition that they need it. So that's all part of this motivation. And a big part of this is the team development aspect of it as well. So making sure that they have a good steady flow of feedback and learning opportunities that they can do. So before moving, a big part of this is emotional intelligence. So before we move into emotional intelligence, we're going to take a brief look at these different motivation theories that help explain why team members engage, disengage, and respond differently in different project conditions. Motivation theories explain why team members engage. So motivation theories help project leaders understand what team members need to stay engaged and perform well. So there's a lot of motivation theories out there, but there's sort of four big ones, main ones, and that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Hertzberg's two-factor theory, McGregor's theory X and theory Y, and Vroom's expectancy theory. And so I'll just briefly cover those as sort of background. And we can, as you work as project managers, you can do a much more deeper dive into this to understand which one applies to you. In my experience, the combination of Maslow and the two-factor theory work together. They kind of overlap each other, and you can hopefully maybe after I get through here, I can explain how that works. But before we move in, then we'll move into emotional intelligence. But let's look at these. These are called classical or classic motivation theories. They're not formulas, but they give the project manager, they give us useful insight into ways to think about why people stay engaged and some become disengaged. Maslow's hierarchy of needs reminds us that people are motivated by more than just the work itself, than task assignments. Team members need basic security, they need a sense of belonging, respect, and they need opportunities for growth. In project work, this can show up through workload stability, role clarity, inclusion, recognition, and professional development, like I was speaking earlier. And you can see that there's this hierarchy moves up to what is called the growth stage, where they're self-motivated. Basically, I think the formal word for this is self-actualization. Get to where they're self-actualized. In other words, they're motivated. It becomes intrinsic motivation. So they're motivated to produce from intrinsic needs, but they don't get there until they've addressed through this. Now, there's been some criticism recently of all of these theories, especially Maslow's theory that when it was developed, that there's some bias that's built into this. But even with that criticism, when you work with a team, you can generally see that this hierarchy does apply, and it really maps itself. And later on, we'll talk about the Tuckman model of team performance, and these Maslow's theories kind of mirror that team performance model. Hertzberg two-factor theory makes an important distinction between reducing dissatisfaction and creating motivation. For example, fixing unclear communication, poor tools, or unfair workload may reduce frustration, but that doesn't automatically inspire high performance. Motivation is more likely to come from meaningful work, responsibility, achievement, and recognition. And so Hertzberg has these theories that he calls hygiene factors. And the hygiene factors are things that, you need to work. Like a lot of people you'll find aren't motivated by money alone, but if the money's not there and it's not the right level, then you're not going to do the work. You'll do something else, or you'll be looking for the next job. You're not going to be, you'll be dissatisfied. So reducing the dissatisfaction. Working conditions are important. They may not be a key motivator, but they're important. For some people, job security is very important. That's a hygiene factor. But once those all are kind of satisfied, then people become motivated by achievement, recognition, growth, and responsibility, which is similar, the overlap to, as I mentioned, to Maslow's theory. As a project manager, you can recognize these hygiene factors and make sure that those things are taken care of. McGregor's X and Y theory focuses on leadership assumptions. If a project manager assumes that people are naturally unmotivated and must be tightly controlled, that often leads to a micromanagement situation. If the project manager assumes that people can be responsible, creative, and committed, leadership approach is more likely to emphasize trust, ownership, and empowerment. So this McGregor theory speaks more to how we as project managers view our team members. And this X and Y theory kind of comes out of the philosophy that workers basically want to avoid work at all costs. And it's management's job to make them work. And it takes a very negative view of people, theory X part of it, negative view of just workers in general. And you can see some of this in some environments, and you have to be careful of how your own biases come into this. Then there's Vroom's expectancy theory that adds a sort of a practical performance connection here. In Vroom's, people are motivated when they believe their effort can lead to successful performance, and that successful performance will lead to outcomes that they value. And if that path between effort, performance, and reward feels unclear or unfair, then motivation will drop. And so this can all kind of be overlaid onto both Herzberg and Maslow's, and maybe the theory Y part of McGregor's theory. But the main point of all of this is that it's not a one size, motivation is not a one size fits all prospect. Project managers and organizational leaders need to understand what supports engagement, what creates frustration, and what helps team members see their work as meaningful and achievable. So now that we've looked at how motivation motivates people, we can move into emotional intelligence, which helps project leaders respond and recognize the human signals that influence motivation. And it gives us clues into conflict and collaboration on the project. Project leaders improve team performance when they recognize emotions, manage responses, and strengthen relationships. Now that we've looked at motivation, we can move into emotional intelligence. Motivation helps explain why people engage with the work. Emotional intelligence helps project managers understand and respond to the human signals that influence engagement, conflict, and collaboration. Project work often happens under significant pressure. Deadlines are tight, priorities compete, stakeholders may be frustrated and demanding, and the team may be working through uncertainty. In those situations, technical project management skills are important, but they're not enough by themselves. Self-awareness means that the project manager recognizes how their own tone, assumptions, stress level, and reactions affect the team. If the project manager seems dismissive, defensive, or impatient, team members may become less willing to raise concerns or ask for help. Self-management means staying composed enough to respond to productivity. This doesn't mean ignoring emotions. It means managing them so that the project manager can listen, clarify, make decisions, and guide the team without escalating tension. Social awareness means paying attention to what is happening with others. Are people overwhelmed? Are they avoiding conflict? Is there frustration under the surface? Are stakeholders becoming less engaged? These signals often appear before they show up in the schedule, quality, or performance metrics. So these social issues can show up before we even measure them. Relationship management is where emotional intelligence becomes practical. The project manager uses empathy, listening, coaching, communication, and trust building to help the team work through issues and stay aligned. So these factors up here, the self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management are all components of emotional intelligence. And somebody who's considered emotionally aware has a good, effective balance in awareness of all these areas. And sometimes it's a hard look in the mirror, like the self-awareness here, to really realize how your behavior influences the behaviors of others around you. And sometimes what we receive back is really what we've put out there, and we're receiving in-kind feedback back. So emotional intelligence can help project leaders notice and manage the human dynamics that influence team performance. And so we're going to look at something here that's related. It's called a Johari window as a practical way to think about this self-awareness, feedback, and trust, and how it can affect project teamwork. We're talking about using this Johari window to improve awareness. And project teams perform better when self-awareness, feedback, and trust reduce hidden assumptions or blind spots. So what you see here is this four-cell quadrant here. It's a 2x2 matrix that's divided up into these areas. What is known to you and what is known to others out here on this side, and what is known to self up here. And what we want to do is we want to try to expand this open area and move into this, reduce this hidden area. This hidden area is what others know, but you don't know. And this is not showing up here on this page very well, but this is what you know about yourself or the project. This is what others know about you or the project that you may not be aware that they know or they may not know. The blind spot is something that comes out of the blue. And then there's this unknown sort of area. You can see how we've talked about known unknowns and known knowns, and all that is in relation to risk. You can look at this as kind of the same thing as how you work. And you can look at this at the individual level. You can also look at this, use this as a team level, and you can use this as a tool to say, well, what do we know? And what do we think that others know, or can we bring others into this to give us input of what they know, so that it becomes, we're trying to expand this area and reduce the size of these other areas, essentially, is how this works. And this was developed back in 1955, but it's a pretty good tool to analyze where you are. It works a lot like that power influence matrix that we talked about with the stakeholders, or with the risk tools that we had for prioritizing risk in terms of known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns, and things like that. So this Johari window is a helpful way to connect emotional intelligence to real project teamwork. It reminds us that team performance is not only shaped by technical skills or assigned responsibilities. It's also shaped by what people understand about themselves and what others observe and what remains unspoken. The open area represents what I know about myself and what others also know. In project teams, it might include communication preferences, strengths, work habits, or known stress points. The larger this area becomes, the easier it is for the team to collaborate. The blind spot represents things others may see in us that we do not see clearly in ourselves. This is where feedback becomes important. A project manager may think they are being decisive, while the team experiences that behavior as dismissive or rushed. The hidden area includes things we know about ourselves but have not shared with the team. Some of this may remain private, but appropriate professional disclosure can build trust. For example, a team member might explain that they need written follow-up after meetings to stay aligned. The unknown area includes capabilities, reactions, or concerns that neither the person nor the team fully recognizes yet. These often emerge under pressure, during conflict, or when the project faces uncertainty. The main point is that emotional intelligence helps project leaders create the conditions for honest feedback, appropriate openness, and stronger collaboration. In project performance terms, the Johari window is not just a psychology model, it's a practical tool for improving communication, trust, and team effectiveness. It helps us think about awareness, feedback, and trust. And so next, we'll look at psychological safety, which helps explain whether team members feel able to speak up, ask questions, raise concerns when project conditions are uncertain. Psychological safety supports project team performance. Teams perform better when people feel safe to speak up, ask questions, challenge assumptions, and admit mistakes. Psychological safety is an important concept in team performance research. This was psychological safety, this term psychological safety was coined by the work of a woman called Amy Edmondson. She was working on her doctorate in healthcare, and she made an observation when she was doing her clinical work that there was this relationship between the people in like an operating room, specifically between doctors and nurses, that the doctors tend to be very condescending and dismissive of the nurses' opinions and reacted negatively. And what she saw was that when people didn't feel that it was safe to speak up, they just withheld information. And what she came to the conclusion was that this information could actually be like in the operating room, in an operating theater, this could be life-threatening or life-concerning work. If a nurse observes something in the operating room and they don't feel safe enough to bring that up to the doctor or the surgeon, then the patient could die if it's critical information. And what she found is that we all do this, and when we're in groups, that we make when we want to speak up in a group or give feedback to someone, we do a basically a split second risk analysis. What is the risk to me as myself is bringing up this information? And we respond accordingly. So if that little, and it's really kind of instinctive. It gets down to sort of those, fundamental personality issues. If we choose either to respond or not respond. And what we want to do is we want to promote an environment where people feel safe to bring up difficult topics or difficult information. So, and the background here matters because psychologically safety is sometimes misunderstood. It doesn't mean that the team avoids accountability, lowers standards, or agrees on everything. In other words, this safety doesn't mean we give up our rigid expectations. It just means we make it safe for people to communicate in that environment. In fact, psychological safety is most valuable when the work is difficult, uncertain, or high stakes. It helps create the conditions where people can be honest about problems while still staying focused on performance. In project environments, this is especially important because many issues are visible to team members before they show up in formal reports or performance metrics. A team member may notice that a task estimate is unrealistic, a requirement is unclear, a stakeholder expectation is shifting, or a quality issue is emerging. And if the team doesn't feel safe speaking up, those concerns may remain hidden until they become a larger project issue or problem. Psychological safety supports several practical behaviors. Team members are more likely to speak up when something seems wrong. They are more likely to ask questions when expectations are unclear, and they're more willing to challenge assumptions when the plan may not reflect reality. They're also more likely to learn from mistakes rather than hide them. For project managers, the key issue is to create a team climate where concerns are welcome, questions are treated as useful, disagreement is handled respectfully, and mistakes lead to learning rather than blame. That kind of environment improves communication, risk identification, decision quality, and adaptability. The main point is that psychological safety supports project performance because it helps the team surface information early. It doesn't replace accountability. It strengthens accountability by making it easier for the team to address real issues before they damage the project. And so next we'll look at what can happen when teams don't feel safe challenging assumptions or raising concerns. We'll talk about groupthink and other forms of poor team decision making. Groupthink can undermine project decisions. Project teams make weaker decisions when the desire for agreement prevents honest evaluation of risk, assumptions, and alternatives. So after talking about psychological safety, it's helpful to look at the opposite problem. What happens when team members don't feel comfortable challenging assumptions or raising concerns? Groupthink occurs when team members are focus on agreement rather than careful decision making. In project work, this can happen when the team wants to avoid conflict, please a sponsor, protect a preferred solution, or move quickly under schedule pressure. The danger here is that silence can be mistaken for agreement. A project manager may think the team supports the plan, but some team members may simply be holding back concerns. They may see a risk, question an estimate, doubt a requirement, or recognize an alternative approach should be considered, but choose not to speak up. Groupthink can create false confidence when the team may believe the decision is strong because no one objected, when in reality, the decision was never fully tested. This can affect risk identification, schedule estimates, cost assumptions, quality decisions, stakeholder expectations, and change decisions. For project managers, the goal is not to create conflict for its own sake. The goal is to create enough constructive challenge so the team can examine assumptions before decisions become locked in. Good project leadership invites dissent, asks what might be missing, encourages alternative viewpoints, and separates disagreement with an idea from disrespect towards a person. This connects directly back to psychological safety. When people feel safe to challenge the plan, the project is more likely to identify problems early and make better decisions. So, as a project manager, to kind of, other than setting up, in addition to setting up an environment of psychological safety, another one is to put on your critical thinking hat and challenge people's assumptions or their notions about what's going on in the project by asking probing questions and hard questions to get to the underlying issues at hand. And then if a good level of psychological safety exists, you can avoid these symptoms here of groupthink. So groupthink show how teams move too quickly towards agreement. In other words, everybody just kind of throws up their hand and says, well, there's nothing I can do. And I'm sure we've all seen this. We might even reacted. I know I have in past. It's like, well, it's your decision. I'll go along with whatever you say because you're not listening, that kind of thing. So we'll look at another problem next. It's called the Abilene Paradox. I don't know how many have heard of this, but this is where a team may collectively choose a direction that no team member actually supports. So it's really a problem of agreement as well in sort of a different way. The Abilene Paradox is when teams agree to what no one wants. Project teams can make poor decisions when team members privately disagree but publicly go along with the group. The Abilene Paradox is closely related to groupthink, but it's slightly different. It's called a paradox because it's a paradox of agreement. In other words, we all disagree with what's going on, but we choose to go along with what's going on. And what happens is typically the things that we feared becomes self-fulfilling, essentially. So in groupthink, the team may pressure itself towards agreement because harmony or consensus becomes more important than critical evaluation. In the Abilene Paradox, the problem is that people may privately disagree with a decision, but each person assumes that everyone else supports it. So in other words, we don't have the information of what other people are thinking, and their behavior leads us to think that they support it, when in reality they don't, but they're looking to you and to others on the team for this input, and they don't get it. So what happens is we all wind up sort of agreeing with each other when we all underlyingly disagree with it. And I kind of saw this happen way back early when, we'd be in meetings, we'd be in these planning meetings and, with a real kind of strong personality leading the group. And we'd take a break and privately people be having conversations about how they don't really understand this and what's going on. But then when we get back in the room, nobody was willing to take that psychological risk to speak up. It's similar to groupthink. In a project setting, this can happen when a team accepts an unrealistic deadline, agrees to a risky technical approach, supports an unclear requirement, or continues with a failing plan because no one wants the person to challenge the direction. And each person may think, well, I have concerns, but everyone else seems to be okay with it. Meanwhile, several other people may be thinking the same thing. And this creates a false consensus. The project manager may believe the team is aligned when the team is actually complying without real commitment. And that can lead to poor decisions weak execution, low ownership, and delayed problem recognition. The project impact can be significant. The team may waste time pursuing work that doesn't make sense, accept risks that may have been challenged, or avoid raising concerns until the project is really in trouble. And for project managers, the lessons is to avoid assuming that silence means agreement, ask questions, invite disagreement, check for concerns privately and publicly, use language such as, "What are we not saying?" or "What concerns would you raise if you were under no pressure to agree?" These questions help uncover hidden disagreement before the team commits to poor direction. I was first exposed to this Abilene Paradox concept by the guy that authored it back in the 1970s is when he first started. He wrote a book about it. He was a faculty at George Washington University, and he noticed that in some groups that people would put in a lot of work and they're all kind of not really addressing the issue, and they all had fears. Like one of the examples that he gave is that the people were where it comes the term Abilene comes from is that it was like a hot summer day, and he was at his in-laws' house, and they were, sitting around. And, if you know anything about Abilene, Texas, in the summertime, it's hot and dry and really miserable. And they were sitting around and deciding what to do next. And the matriarch of the family, the patriarch of the family, the more dominant personality, said, "Well, why don't we all go into town and have dinner at the Luby's, or I think it was." And they all just kind of said, "Well, I'll go if she wants to go." And they say, "Well, I'll go. She'll go. I'll go if you want to go." And they all kind of went ahead, took this trip. They were miserable. They got back, and the the patriarch says, "Well, man, that was a miserable trip. Why did you all even take me up on it? I didn't really want to go in the first place. Even the person that suggested it didn't want to go in the first place. He was just wanting to do it because he thought that they might be bored." So in other words, his expectations that and all the other people's, "Well, I only went because she said she would go. Well, I only went because you went." So they were all creating this false blame, and they wasted all this time going someplace that nobody wanted to go. And it was only after they realized that they really got engaged and did something productive. And that's the Abilene paradox. And the one thing that he said about this that I thought was important is that, and even goes to psychological safety, that the real solution to this is to bring some grace into the situation. In other words, realize that this one of our biggest fears is to be ostracized from our group. And both of these situations, the groupthink, Abilene paradox, all revolve around team members' fear that they'll be ostracized in some way. And the one way that we can kind of prevent that as project managers is to bring some grace in. In other words, accept people for who they are, what they are, and make them aware that they're not going to suffer negatively for being honest and of their concerns and their feelings about the situation. Now, it doesn't mean we don't, as with the Abilene paradox, as with the groupthink and the psychological safety and all these things, we don't give up accountability. There's only, a certain point where people are not being accountable, they're trying to avoid it. So we have to all look for those things. It doesn't mean we give up on all of those issues, but it means we become more open, more forgiving. And then we try to create situations like if we took a trip to Abilene, well, why do we do that? And let's avoid that situation in the future. So that's the one place to put this. And after looking at groupthink and the Abilene paradox, we can bring everything back together and look at the project manager's role of creating these team conditions where we have honest communication, we have constructive disagreement, and shared accountability that support better project performance. Project leaders reduce decision risk by making concerns visible. Better project decisions happen when leaders invite dissent, test assumptions, and turn hidden concerns into shared information. After discussing groupthink and the Abilene paradox, this slide brings this presentation back to what project managers can actually do. The main problem in both cases is not that the team disagrees. In many ways, disagreement is useful. The real problem is that concerns stay hidden. Team members may see a risk, question assumption, or doubt a decision, but the project moves forward is as if everyone is aligned. Project managers reduce that risk by making it normal and expected for people to raise concerns. That can be as simple as asking, what are we missing? Or what would make this decision fail? It can also mean inviting a team member to play the role of constructive challenger before a major decision is approved. Testing assumptions is also important. Many project decisions depend on assumptions about time, cost, resources, stakeholder support, and technical feasibility, quality expectations, or vendor performance. If those assumptions are not made visible, the team may agree to a plan without fully understanding what the plan depends on. Checking alignment means going beyond surface agreement. A project manager should listen for hesitation, vague agreement, silence, or signs that people are complying without real commitment. Sometimes the follow-up question matters more than the first question. Structured methods can help. Risk reviews, decision matrices, retrospectives, lessons learned, stakeholder feedback loops, product demonstrations give the team a safer and more disciplined way to examine concerns before they become performance problems. The main point is that strong project leadership doesn't eliminate disagreement. It creates a process for using disagreement productively. When concerns become visible, the team can make better decisions, reduce avoidable risk, and improve project performance. These decision practices show how leaders can make concerns visible in the moment. Now we'll step back and look at how team performance develops over time through the Tuckman model. Team performance develops over time. Project teams move through development stages, and leaders should adapt, support as the team forms, struggles, aligns, and performs. So, in other words, as teams move through this model, we should adapt our support structure. So, early when the team is starting, we may want to be more directive. And when the team gets to the performing phase, we want to be more enabling and more supportive. The Tuckman model, which is shown up here, the Tuckman model of team development has these four stages: forming, storming, norming, and performing. In newer versions of this, there's also an adjourning phase that we talk about, but we also have this concept now of long-lived teams, so we may or may not see this adjourning phase. But before we can close out this section, we need to connect these to this team development model. Tuckman's model, again, is seeing some criticism here of late, and it's when it was the research methods that developed it. Tuckman was a psychologist, and the study that he did was essentially a bunch of other psychologists, so there wasn't a lot of diversity in professional background when he developed this. But again, it's one of these tools that, despite some of the shortcomings of its development, it's been a model that's been particularly useful in explaining how teams develop over time. And one of the things that some of the later research has shown is that all teams go through this type of these stages in a newly formed team, and they also go through it when the team composition is kind of changed. So maybe we have team members come and go on the project. So then that changes the composition of the team, and sometimes they regress back to one, like a performing team may regress back to a storming team to get back and then go back through norming as they acclimate to the new team members that's come in. But another interesting thing that I found in my reading is that they all go through this, and it seems to be how quickly they get to that performing stage seems to be a factor of the duration of the project itself. So a 6-month project, teams will go through this much faster. It's typically about half of the project time. So a 6-month project, the team will may hit that performing stage. It's more likely they'll hit it about month 3. Where a 2-year project, a team's going to take till about the first year to get to that point. So there seems to be some correlation. We don't know. The research hasn't really come to a good conclusion on it. But what I've read is seems to be a significant correlation between the project duration and the time it takes for teams to actually work their way through these different stages. So, having said all that, the basic idea is that project teams don't become high performing immediately. They develop over time. And the time seems to be dependent on the duration of the project. Even a team with talented individuals still has to clarify roles, build trust, learn how to communicate, work through conflict, and establish shared expectations. In the forming stage, team members are usually trying to understand the project, their responsibilities, the leadership structure, and how the team will work together. At this stage, project managers need to provide clarity, direction, and structure. In the storming stage, differences may begin to surface. The team members may disagree about priorities, methods, roles, decision authority, workload, or stakeholder expectations. This stage can be uncomfortable, but it's not automatically negative. Some conflict is part of how team identifies issues and works towards better alignment. What you want to get out of this stage and try to carry forward is that level of what I call productive conflict, where teams remain critical of what's going on and they learn and ask deep probing questions and they disagree with each other. My experience has been that when the team gets quiet and there's not much conflict going on, not much productive conflict, then they tend maybe slipping into one of those groupthink or Abilene Paradox situations. So you want a productive level of conflict. What you want to avoid is conflict that is negative personally, negative professionally, negative to stakeholders, negative to the organization. It's not what I would call non-constructive feedback. You want constructive feedback. At the norming stage, the team begins to establish stronger working relationships. Communication improves, expectations become clearer, and the team develops shared norms of collaboration, problem solving, and accountability. And that's where carrying that productive conflict forward helps. It's part of that communication, that improved communications. At the performing stage, the team is better able to focus on delivery. Team members understand how to work together, raise concerns, solve problems, and adapt to change and sustain performance. For project managers, the practical lesson is that leadership should be tailored to the team's stage of development. A newly formed team may need more structure and clarity. A team in storming may need facilitation, conflict management, and psychological safety. A norming team may benefit from reinforcement of working agreements. A performing team may need more autonomy and fewer unnecessary controls. It's also important to remember that teams don't always move through these stages at once and stay in performing. A new stakeholder, a scope change, a resource loss, a schedule pressure, or a major issue can push the team back into earlier stages. That's why project team performance requires ongoing leadership and attention. The Tuckman model shows how project teams develop as they form, work through conflict, establish norms, and improve performance. A related modern idea is that organizations can gain additional performance benefits when effective teams remain together over time. Next, we'll look at how long-lived teams and how stable membership can help teams retain knowledge, strengthen trust, and continuously improve how they work. Long-lived teams build performance over time. Stable project teams can improve performance when they retain knowledge, strengthen trust, and continuously improve how they work together. The Tuckman model helps us understand how teams develop through forming, storming, norming, and performing. A modern extension of that idea is the concept of long-lived teams. A long-lived team is a relatively stable group of people that stays together across multiple projects, releases, and product increments, and or value delivery cycles. Instead of forming a new team for every project and then disbanding it, the organization treats the team itself as a performance asset. This matters because the project teams build capability over time. They learn each other's communication styles, strengths, work habits, decision patterns, and problem-solving approaches. They also develop shared knowledge about the organization, stakeholders, systems, risk, and delivery environment. One advantage of long-lived teams is retained knowledge. When a team stays together, lessons learned don't disappear at the end of a single project. The team carries forward what it learned about requirements, estimates, quality concerns, stakeholder expectations, technical constraints, and delivery risk. A second advantage is trust. Stable teams often become more comfortable raising concerns, challenging assumptions, and solving problems together. This connects directly to psychological safety and decision quality. A third advantage is more predictable delivery. Over time, teams become better at understanding their own capacity, estimating work, coordinating tasks, and identifying constraints. This can improve planning, forecasting, and performance management. Long-lived teams also support continuous improvement because the same team continues working together. Retrospectives and lessons learned can be applied directly to future work rather than stored in a document or a system and forgotten. However, long-lived teams are not automatically high-performing. They can become too comfortable, resistant to outside feedback, or vulnerable to groupthink. They may also need new skills, refresh roles, or changes in membership as project needs evolve. And one thing that I've seen organizations do for long-lived teams is they carve out a week periodically, like every quarter, that allows the team to focus on something other than project work. Like typically like a hackathon is a good way to do it, where they can work on something that they want. And what they have to do in doing that, they have to go through this conflict, this decision making of what are we going to work on, how we're going to do it. And it kind of helps refresh some of that conflict, some of that team forming conflict and that psychological safety concepts. It helps bring all that and keep it fresh and keeps avoiding that complacency that can happen. The main point here is that long-lived teams can strengthen project performance when stability is paired with learning, accountability, psychological safety, and continuous improvement. There's also a notion too here that's kind of related, is that we can build large long-lived teams, and then we can pull from those individuals when we want to focus on a particular deliverable. And that's called dynamic teaming. And we can create dynamic teams kind of on the fly. So it's one way to have the benefits of long-lived teams and the benefits of bringing together, dynamic or small teams and get those benefits as well in this. So long-lived teams show how stable membership can help project teams retain knowledge, strengthen trust, and improve delivery over time. But this stability alone doesn't guarantee better performance. Teams still need feedback, reflection, and intentional learning. And so now we'll look at how continuous improvement helps teams adapt their practices and strengthen performance while project work is still underway. Project teams improve when they use feedback, performance data, and reflection to adjust how they work. Before we pull team performance section together, it's important to emphasize that team performance is not fixed. Teams can improve over time, but improvement usually does not happen by accident. It requires deliberate learning. This connects directly to the broader theme of project performance management. The course competencies include integrating project management principles with measurement and continuous improvement, as well as using metrics to improve project outcome. Team performance should be understood in the same way. We do not only measure schedules, costs, risk, and deliverables. We also pay attention to how the team communicates, collaborates, solves problems, and adapts. A useful starting point is observation. Project leaders should look for signals in the work. Are decisions taking too long? Are handoffs breaking down? Are people unclear about roles? Are the same issues appearing repeatedly? Are stakeholders receiving the information they need? These are team performance signals. Reflection is the next step. Teams need structured opportunities to discuss what is working and what's not working. This can happen through retrospectives, lessons learned discussions, performance reviews, product demonstrations, or informal synchronization or check-in meetings. The point is to turn experience into usable learning. And through this turning experience into usable learning, the team also creates a sort of a team wisdom. When the team has to adapt its practices, if communication is unclear, the team may adjust meeting rhythms, reporting formats, or escalation paths. If decision-making is slow, the team may clarify authority. If conflict is avoided, the project manager may create safer ways to surface concerns. If workload is uneven, roles and responsibilities may need to be revisited. The strongest learning happens during the project, not only at the end. PMBOK 7 emphasizes that project teams continuously review, discuss, adapt, and respond to change with whole system in mind, and that performance domains should be evaluated through outcomes-focused measures rather than simple adherence to processes or artifacts. The idea fits here in that team learning should improve project outcomes while the work is still underway. The main point is that continuous improvement turns team performance into active management responsibility. And project managers help teams observe, reflect, adapt, and reinforce better ways of working. So now that we've talked about motivation, emotional intelligence, psychological safety, decision behavior, team development, long-lived teams, and continuous improvement, we can bring all these together into a broader view of how team performance supports overall project performance. Project performance improves when teams communicate openly, stay engaged, and make sound decisions and learn as the work unfolds. This slide is intended to bring together the team performance section of the presentation. The major point is that team performance is not separate from project performance. It's one of the main ways that project performance is produced. A project may have a strong schedule, budget, risk register, stakeholder plan, and communication plan, but those artifacts don't manage the project by themselves. People interpret information, make decisions, communicate concerns, resolve conflicts, and adapt the work as conditions change. Motivation, emotional intelligence, psychological safety, team development, and continuous improvement all influence whether the team can perform effectively. When team members are engaged, supported, and willing to speak up, the project manager receives better information sooner. Information flow is especially important. Concerns, feedback, lessons learned, stakeholder signals, and performance data need to move through the team before problems escalate. If information is hidden, ignored, or delayed, project performance suffers. Decision quality also matters. Groupthink and Abilene Paradox remind us that agreement is not always the same as alignment. Strong project leaders invite dissent, test assumptions, and make hidden concerns visible before the team commits to action. Finally, strong teams learn as work unfolds. They use retrospectives, feedback, and performance data to adapt their practices during the project rather than waiting till closure. The key takeaway is that project managers manage performance through both technical systems and human systems. Metrics, plans, and controls are important, but people create the conditions for those tools to become useful. With stakeholder engagement, information distribution, and team performance now connected, we can close this by identifying key takeaways from week 8 and how these ideas support project performance management. So stakeholders, information, and team drive performance. Performance improves when engagement, information flow, and team behavior are managed as a connected performance system. This week's presentation is focused on 3 areas that are sometimes treated separately: stakeholder engagement, project information distribution, and team performance. The key takeaway is that these areas are deeply connected. Stakeholder engagement helps the project team understand who is affected by the project, what they need, and how they may influence work, and how their expectations may change. Engagement is not only about communicating outward, it's also about listening, interpreting stakeholder signals, and adjusting the project management approach when needed. Information distribution supports that engagement by making sure the right people receive the right information at the right time. Project information has to be timely, relevant, accurate, and useful. When communication is weak, stakeholders become uncertain, teams lose alignment, and decision-making suffers. Team performance is the internal side of that same system. The project team must be motivated, emotionally aware, psychologically safe, and able to make sound decisions. The team also needs to avoid decision traps such as groupthink and the Abilene Paradox, or the Abilene Paradox known as the paradox of agreement, where silence or surface agreement may hide real concerns. Across all 3 areas, performance management depends on feedback, adaptation, and project managers should not wait until the end of the project to ask whether communication, stakeholder engagement, or team performance worked well. They should monitor these areas throughout project execution and make adjustments as the work unfolds. The larger point is that project performance is not produced by metrics alone. Metrics help us see what's happening, but people, communications, and decisions determine whether the project can respond effectively. Okay, so that's the end of this.